Hello, everybody. This is Mr. Combs, and in this video, I want to talk about the music of poetry, rhyme, rhythm, meter, and other devices of sound. So often, poets use sound to convey meaning in a poem. The way a poem sounds when read aloud is important. In fact, poetry was first as a part of the oral tradition, sung, chanted, or recited rather than written down on a page. So originally, the only way that people experienced poetry was to hear it. And the oral tradition is just a form of communication where knowledge, art, ideas, and cultural material is received, preserved, and transferred by word of mouth from one generation to the next through speech or song. It was used to transmit information before the invention of written text. But it is still used today in the form of folk tales, ballads, urban legends, and family history. So if you've listened to your grandparents or your great grandparents or even your parents tell stories or give wisdom, impart wisdom, then you have engaged in the oral tradition. I can remember when I was very young, my grandma would always say, self brag is a half scandal. And I'm not even sure what that means, except that you shouldn't brag about yourself, maybe. And whenever I hear somebody who's being real braggy about themselves, I always remember that and say, half self brag is a half scandal, is what my grandma used to say. So that's sort of that idea of the oral tradition. So now the oral tradition is the first literature. Basically, it's the first way that human beings told stories before there was even systems of writing. Human beings were telling stories. They were sharing stories around the fire. And the oral tradition actually predates written history. So poetry was a part of human culture from the beginning. Poets use a variety of devices and techniques to create meaning through the use of sound. And as Saphir and Daniel tell us, in choosing their words, poets always consider musical quality as well as meaning. Remember how we talked about if there is a word in a poem, it's there on purpose. Poets, because poetry is relatively brief when compared to other types of literature, they have to be very purposeful with the words they use. So they are purposeful with meaning, as we've talked about before, but they are also purposeful with the sound that a word makes when you say it aloud. And poets often use sound to reinforce meaning. And the study of poetic sounds and rhythms is called prosody. So when you talk about prosody, you're talking about how a poem sounds when you recite it or when you read it aloud. So let's talk about rhyme. This is one of the most obvious devices used by poets. And we say words rhyme if they have identical ending sounds. And you guys know about rhyme. You've been hearing things that rhyme ever since you've been able to hear things, right? So, according to Pickering and Hopper, rhyme is the most unnatural, the most noticeable, and the most controversial, and possibly the most common of all poetic devices. Now, they say that rhyme is unnatural, and in fact, it's so unnatural to our actual speech that whenever someone says something that rhymes by mistake, don't you notice it? I mean, everyone notices it, right? And again, my grandmother used to say, whenever she would rhyme, she would say, after she would rhyme by mistake, she would say, "Oh, I was a poet and didn't know it, and my feet didn't show it." And she would stop there, but the whole saying is, "I was a poet, I didn't know it, and my feet didn't show it because they wasn't Longfellers." And that's a reference to the poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Um, but yeah, so whenever someone says a rhyme, you notice it, right? We sort of stop our speech and we notice it because rhyme is not naturally how we speak, and it's very noticeable. It's controversial because sometimes people say that poems must rhyme. Sometimes people say poems do not have to rhyme, and in fact, the general consensus now is that poetry does not have to rhyme, but it's very common. When we think about poetry, that's what we think of most. When you thought about poetry, when you knew you were taking a class in literature, did you think about a poem as something that, as a piece of literature that used a certain speaker or that used a metaphor? No, you probably did not at first, even though we've talked about those things before we talk about rhyme. You probably instantly thought, well, a poem is something that rhymes, right? There will be rhyme. Some poems have rhymes, some poems do not. And in fact, rhyme can be exact, as in love, dove, or it can be what we call slant or approximate rhyme, as in could and bird. So could, bird, those don't actually really rhyme exactly, but they sound enough alike that they constitute a rhyme when we are using those words together in poetry. When the rhyme occurs at the ends of lines of poetry, we call it end rhyme. So, for example, in the song White Winter Hymnal by Fleet Foxes, you hear, I was following the pack, all swallowed in their coats, with scarves of red tied round their throats. So, coats and throats. That's end rhyme. It occurs at the end of the line. But rhyme can also occur within lines of poetry, and we call that internal rhyme. And in our modern world, the best people who make use of internal rhyme, or I guess the people who make the best use of internal rhyme, are actually rappers. And internal rhyme creates this sort of flow, right? That I really like. And I love this line from Downtown by Macklemore and Ryan Lewis. She got 1988 Mariah Carey hair, very rare, mom jeans on her derriere. So notice how the carry and very rhyme, not at the end of lines. Hair and rare and air and carry and very and dairy. I forgot dairy, right? So that sort of creates this flow of actually riding on the moped, right? So I love that line, and I love the internal rhyme in it. So poets use rhyme for several reasons. To emphasize words and passages, rhyme is noticeable. So if I want to connect to concepts, or if I want to connect to images, I will connect them by using things that words that rhyme. To help their poems sound musical, right? Songs rhyme, so it will help my poem sound musical if I use rhyme. To show their skills, some rhyme is very hard. Some words are very hard to rhyme, or if we have a rhyme that's very striking, or two words that are put together that we don't normally think of as going together. Sometimes you will not, I don't think, in the poems that we're going to read for uh, the sounds, but in the next set of poetry that we read with our last um, lesson on poetry, which deals with poetic forms, we're going to read a poem called "The Jungle Husband" that has some interesting rhyming going on. And then also, I don't have it listed here, but back when poetry was recited, rhyme helped people to remember lines. So you make rhymes up now to help you remember different things, right? So that's also one of the reasons why. But now that we have language, we have things that we can write down. We don't have to remember things as much. Rhyme is not used to help the poet remember. Well, it could still help the poet remember if the poet is going to be reciting, or if the poetry is part of a play. You might need to remember. It will help you. The rhyme will help you to remember those lines. So remember that rhyme is based on the sound of words, not the spelling. Two words might rhyme even though they do not look as if they do on the page, and vice versa. Two words that look as if they should rhyme may in fact not. So, poems with rhyme usually have a pattern of rhyming sounds at the end of lines called a rhyme scheme. A rhyme scheme is usually indicated using lowercase letters representing rhyming sounds. So let's consider the two poems below. So let's consider Nothing Gold Can Stay by Robert Frost. So Robert Frost writes, Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold, her early leaves a flower, but only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf, so Eden sank to grief, so dawn goes down to day, nothing gold can stay. So notice how gold and hold rhyme, flower and hour rhyme, leaf and grief rhyme, day and stay rhyme. So we might call this rhyme scheme AA, BB, CC, DD. So anytime you have a new rhyme, you let that be represented by a new letter. So here A is gold, but then hold is the same. So I'm going to let that be represented by an A2. Flower is new, so I'm going to let that be represented by B, and so on. So the rhyme scheme of Robert Frost's poem is AABBCCDD, and this is a very simple rhyme scheme involving couplets or pairs of lines. Anytime you have lines that are paired either as by themselves, or if they're paired because they rhyme together, we call that a couplet. Some rhyme schemes can be more complicated, however. Consider Robert Frost's other poem and try to figure out its rhyme scheme before you move on. So, this is Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. Whose woods are these? I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. Take a moment and use lowercase letters to try to determine the rhyme scheme of this poem. Okay, I hope that you tried to determine the rhyme scheme of this poem. Let's take a look here. So it's AABA, BBCB. So notice how a rhyme from the first group of lines, which is called a stanza, and we're going to talk about stanzas later on. But any grouping of lines or any division of lines in a poem is called a stanza. So the first stanza has AABA, and then BBCB, and then CCDC, and then the last stanza or the last grouping of lines has D, 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 D. So, not all poetry must rhyme. Harman and Holman state that rhyme and the importance of it enjoys a modern, rhyme and the importance it enjoys in modern versification are comparatively recent development. Ancient Sanskrit, recent developments, Ancient Sanskrit, Greek, and Latin poetry was not rhymed. Our earliest English verse, Beowulf, is an example, was not based on rhyme. Historians sometimes credit the development of rhyme to ceremonials within the Catholic Church and suggest that the priests made use of rhyme as a device to aid the worshippers in their singing and memorizing of the ritualistic procedure. And the horse, I guess, realizes that he shouldn't be saying all this. He should just be saying nay. So he says, nay. So in addition to rhyme, poets have rhythm. So let's talk about rhythm, meter, and scansion. Or the subtitle here is, Did You Know Poems Have Feet? So the human body has a rhythm. And rhythm will define as a regular flow of motion or sound. Humans are rhythmic beings. According to Saphir and Daniel, if we look closely, we can observe observe, a regular pattern in the way we breathe, in the way we walk or swim or plow our fields. There is also rhythm in the way we talk. Furthermore, our hearts beat lub dub, lub dub, lub dub. Because of this internal rhythm, human beings are, as Pickering and Hopper point out, rhythm making creatures. When we listen to the monotone ticking of a wristwatch, we hear it as a rhythmic tick tock. The rattle of a moving train is heard as a rhythmic clickety clack. So, because we have such a rhythm, we see or we look for patterns of rhythm in other places. We hear the drumming of a horse's hooves as clip clop. We make something rhythmic out of even the most dull and invariable experiences. Poetry, as a human creation, then, also has rhythm. Sometimes a poem has a definite, regular pattern we can measure, and we call this the meter of the poem. And when a poem has no regulated pattern throughout, no meter, we say the poem is written in free verse. So when a poem is written in free verse, there is not a regular pattern. Some lines may have a pattern, some lines may not. It may be irregular, it's not a regular pattern. When we analyze poems with meter, we usually break up each line into a series of feet. And a foot is a grouping of stressed or emphasized and unstressed or not emphasized syllables. So a stressed syllable is usually represented by the symbol dash. It's a slanted line going up. And an unstressed syllable is represented by the symbol, and we'll call that a U. So stressed syllable is a dash, unstressed is a U. So let's consider the two names below, Elaine and Ashley. So when I say Elaine, when I exaggerate the way I say Elaine, I say Elaine, Elaine. So notice that I'm emphasizing the second syllable in the name, Elaine. I don't say Elaine, right? I don't say Elaine. I say Elaine, Elaine. So the first syllable is unstressed, and the second syllable is stressed. So I say that here. Elaine consists of an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed one. When you say Elaine aloud, the emphasis is on the second syllable. So I might indicate the stressed and unstressed syllable by saying you slash or unstressed stressed. Now, when I say Ashley, Ashley, I do emphasize or I do stress the first syllable. I don't say Ashley. If someone's name isn't Ashley, it's Ashley. So in Ashley, I have a stressed syllable followed by an unstressed one. And when you say Ashley aloud, the emphasis is on the first syllable. So I might represent the syllables of Ashley like this, Ashley. So let me go back here. I can think about Elaine and Ashley each as feet. So if the word Elaine was in a line of poetry, it would be 1 foot. If the word Ashley was in a line of poetry, it would be 1 foot. And so in a line of poetry, I can have different types of feet. So we could have something called an iamb. And an iamb is 1 unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. So an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. Elaine would actually be an example of an iamb. So what if I said, I want to go to Italy and eat a pizza pie? I want to go to Italy. So notice how I want is the stressed syllable, right? So I want is an iamb. I want, and we have the unstressed syllable first and then the stressed one. To go, so to go. Go is where we stress, right? So to go is another foot. That's an example of an iamb. to Italy, right? And eat a pizza pie, and so on. So let's take a look at how we might indicate the feet in I want to go to Italy and eat a pizza pie. So I want to go to it. So to it would be another foot, and then Ali would be another foot. So there we have, it's not necessarily words, it's the syllables that we're looking for. So to Italy is basically two words, but it contains 2 feet. So I want is two words that is 1 foot. To go is 1 foot. And to it is 1 foot. And Ali is another foot. Okay? Now, if we have the opposite of that, one stressed syllable followed by an unstressed syllable, we have something called a trochee. And you'll be able to hear the difference. So when we have a line that uses iambs, we have I want to go to Italy to eat and eat a pizza pie. I want to go to Italy and eat a pizza pie. But when we have a line that has trochees in it, and in fact, a line made up of iambs is called iambic. So these are iambic lines. So if we have trochaic lines, then you'll notice the difference. How about this line? Double, double, toil and trouble, fire, burn, and cauldron bubble. So the stress syllable is first here. Double, double, toil and trouble. Right? Do you see that? That's different than I want to go to Italy, right? Fire. So you can hear the stress syllable is first. When I say fire, you can hear that the first syllable is stressed. Fire, burn, and cauldron bubble. And that's from Shakespeare. That's actually from Macbeth. It's the chant of the three fates, or the witches in Macbeth. And as I said before, a line made up of trochees is called trochaic. So the first group of lines, those are iambic lines because they're made up of iambs, and trochaic lines are made up of trochees. Now, if you have two unstressed syllables followed by a stressed syllable, you have something called an anapest. And I'm telling you, you can hear that these lines are different. And I don't want you to stress over iambs and trochees and anapests and dactyls too much, but you will be able to notice that things sound different when we're using different feet. I mean, I want to go to Italy and eat a pizza pie sounds very different than double, double, toil and trouble, fire, burn, and cauldron bubble, right? So let's see how an anapest will sound. So, for the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of the beautiful Annabel Lee. So, for the moon never beams. So I have two unstressed syllables followed by a stressed one. For the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of the beautiful Annabel Lee. So, two unstressed syllables followed by a stressed syllable. And lines that are made up of anapests are called anapestic. And then finally, because there are other different types of feet, but I think these are the only ones we're going to look at. Finally, a dactyl is a stressed syllable followed by two unstressed syllables. So, when can their glory fade? Oh, the wild charge they made. So, when can their glory fade? Oh, the wild charge they made. Right? You can hear that. You can hear how that's different than for the moon. When can there? For the moon. When can there? For the moon never beams. When can their glory fade? You see the difference there. And lines made up of dactyls are called dactylic. So lines of poetry are made up of several feet, and we can categorize poems based on the number of feet contained within the lines. So if a poem has 1 feet, we call that monometer or monometer. If a line has 2 feet, we call it dimeter. If a line has 3 feet, we call it trimeter, or, well, I think trimeter. If a line has 4 feet, we call it tetrameter. If a line has 5 feet, we call it pentameter. If a line has 6 feet, it's called hexameter. If a line has 7 feet, it's called heptameter. And if a line has 8 feet, it's called octameter. So monometer or monometer, dimeter, and trimeter are sort of the only ones that are pronounced a little bit differently. And the rest are tetrameter, pentameter, hexameter, heptameter, octameter. So some poems use a regular foot and line meter type throughout, while other poems are more varied. So we can think of rhythm as a pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables in a line. We can then think of meter as a system for helping the reader reproduce the rhythm intended by the author. And when you do that, that's called scanning a poem. And scansion is the process by which the reader can discover the prevailing rhythm in a poem. The reader does this by identifying the dominant foot contained in the lines and identifying the number of feet per line. Lines of poetry can be named by the type and number of feet contained within them. For example, a line of 5 iambs is called Iambic Pentameter. So what I want you to do is try your hand at scanning the following lines. Now, this is an exercise that I want you to do. Don't worry too much about this. This is not the focus of this class, and this is probably the most difficult thing we're going to study when we study literature. So if you don't quite get the hang of it, that's okay. Don't worry about it too much. But I do want you to practice. I do want you to have some experience practicing scanning some lines of poetry. So let's look at the first one. So, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Try to scan that. All right, so I hope you were able to scan these lines. Let's look at the way that I scanned these earlier. So I said that there were 5 lines or 5 feet in each line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is pentameter. And then I said it was an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed one. So shall I compare thee to a summer's day, right? Thou art more lovely and more temperate, right? So I think this is iambic pentameter. And because it comes closest to the natural rhythm of speech in English, iambic pentameter is a very common meter in poetry written using the English language. And we call this blank verse. So blank verse, well, we call iambic pentameter when it's not rhymed, we call that blank verse. So blank verse is poetry written in unrhymed iambic pentameter. It is called such because the ends of the lines are blank of rhyme. And Saphir and Daniel remind us that some of the greatest English poetry is written in blank verse, including much of the poetry in Shakespeare's plays. Now, this is from one of Shakespeare's poems. So, in fact, if we were to have the entire poem, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short of date." So that rhymes. So this is not blank verse, it's just iambic pentameter. But if you read Shakespeare's plays, many of his plays are written in lines of verse and they do not rhyme generally. So that would be blank verse. Okay, let's look at this one. It's from a poem. I think the poem is called Eve by Ralph Hodgson. Eve with her basket was deep in the bells and grass, wading in bells and grass. So try this one. Okay, so let's take a look. So Eve with her basket was deep in the bells and grass, excuse me, wading in bells and grass. So I think there are 2 feet in each line, right? And this is a stressed syllable followed by 2 unstressed syllables. So I think it's a dactyl, and there are 2 feet in the line, so I think this is dactylic dimeter. All right, let's talk about other manipulations of sound. With both rhyme and rhythm, poets use repetition to manipulate sound and create or emphasize meaning. Poets can use other repetitive techniques to manipulate sound as well, and a few of these are listed below. So, one technique is alliteration. And alliteration is the repetition of consonant sounds, usually at the beginning of words, but not always. And Saphir and Daniel state alliteration seems to have a special appeal for the ear and is found in many familiar expressions. A dime a dozen, so that's the repetition of the D sound. Bigger and better, that's the repetition of the B sound. Jump for joy, J sound. Alliteration is often used to reinforce meaning or to create a mood. Consider this excerpt from Samuel Taylor Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. So the fair breeze blew, the white foam flew, the furrow followed free. We were the first that ever burst into that silent sea. So notice the effect of breeze blew, fair foam flew, furrow followed free, right? It's sort of pleasing to the ear. Breeze blew, burst. Notice how it connects everything. White we were, silent sea. Because alliteration gets our attention, many companies use alliteration in their names. So consider Bed Bath and Beyond, Dunkin' Donuts, Chuck E. Cheese, right? Chuck cheese. The ch sound is repeated. Here's some other examples of alliteration. Little old lady got mutilated late last night. Werewolves of London again. That's by Warren Zevon. The Werewolves of London. That great song. I love it. I play it every Halloween as I'm handing out candy to trick or treaters. But the L sound there. Little old lady got mutilated late last night. Notice one of those L's is not at the beginning of words. What about slowly, silently, now the moon walks the night in her silver shoon? And that's by a poem, or that's from a poem by Walter de la Mare. Notice how that sort of, to me, that sort of gives an image of gliding, right? Slowly, silently, now the moon walks the night in her silver shoon. They paved paradise and put up a parking lot, right? They paved paradise and put up a parking lot. Notice the P there. Paved paradise, put up a parking lot. So notice how that affects your ears, or how that sounds to you. Now, sometimes literary scholars will use the term consonants to refer generally to the repetition of consonant sounds, and they will reserve alliteration for repeating consonant sounds occurring only on the stressed syllables of words. But for simplicity's sake, we will use alliteration just to mean that repetition of consonant sounds. So that's what we're going to use. That's done as well. We also have assonance. And assonance is the repetition of vowel sounds. Assonance can regulate the pacing of a poem or line of text. For example, long vowel sounds tend to slow the pace of a reading, whereas short vowel sounds tend to quicken a reader's pace. This control of pacing is an effective device utilized by writers to create or indicate the tone and mood of a literary work. Let's consider these examples. On a proud round cloud in the white high night. So notice ow, ow, ow. Proud round cloud. White high night. So notice that the repetition of those vowel sounds. What about you do not do any more black shoe, in which I have lived like a foot for 30 years, poor and white, barely daring to breathe or a chew. So you do not do, shoe, to, a chew. Notice that ooh sound, right? What about flash with a rash? Give me my cash, flicking my ash, running with my money, son. Go out with a blast. Right? Do you hear that? Ash, rash, cash, ash. You know, the flash, rash, cash, ash, that ass sound. Blast, running with my money, son. Do you see how that that creates a certain effect? Or what about some vodka that'll jumpstart my heart quicker than a shock when I get shocked at the hospital by the doctor when I'm not cooperating while I'm rocking the table while he's operating? So, vodka, shock, doctor, rocking, shocked, hospital, not operating, right? So, do you hear that ah sound? They hear that ah sound. And if you hear Eminem deliver this as he's as he's rapping this, he really does put the emphasis on those ah sounds. So that's assonance. And then again, refrain is a repeated word, phrase, an entire line, or a stanza even. We have already scanned a portion of Edgar Allan's poem Annabel Lee, but let's take another look at the poem. So I'm not going to read through the whole poem. You can pause if you'd like and read through it. I might actually put in the materials for this lesson someone reading this that you can listen to. But it was many, many years ago in a kingdom by the sea. And we keep repeating, I was a child and she was a child in this kingdom by the sea. And this was the reason that long ago in this kingdom by the sea, to shut her up in a sepulchre in this kingdom by the sea. Yes, it was the reason, as all men know, in this kingdom by the sea. What effect does the repetition of kingdom by the sea have on the poem, right? What kind of mood does the refrain create? And this is by Edgar Allan Poe, and this is actually a picture or a painting, I guess, of his wife Virginia, who died and is thought to be the inspiration for this poem. So what effect does the repetition of the phrase kingdom by the sea have on the poem? I think it sort of gives it this otherworldly mood, right? This is something that's happening in this kingdom by the sea, this mystical place. Here's a song that's a little more recent. This is from Michael Jackson's song Smooth Criminal. And so he's repeating here, okay, and the phrase, Annie, are you okay? So, will you tell us that you're okay? There's a sound at the window. Then he struck you a crescendo. So, this is about someone in their apartment and there's a break in. And then we have the refrain, Annie, are you okay? Annie, are you okay? Are you okay, Annie? Annie, are you okay? Annie, are you okay? Are you okay, Annie? Annie, are you okay? Annie, are you okay? Are you okay, Annie? And then he says, you've been hit by a smooth criminal. But what does that um, what does that repetition create? A sense of urgency, right? Like, Annie, are we okay? It's almost desperate. And you can almost hear as Michael Jackson is singing this, the desperation. Annie, are you okay? Annie, please tell us that you're okay at one point, I think he says. Um, so that creates urgency. And the last manipulation of sound we're going to talk about is called onomatopoeia. An onomatopoeia occurs when the sound of a word imitates or suggests its meaning. For instance, the words buzz or humming or hiss. Onomatopoetic words, help the reader actually hear, not just know what is going on. So let's consider a couple examples. Bang, bang, he shot me down. Bang, bang, I hit the ground. Bang, bang, that awful sound. Bang, bang, my baby shot me down. So this was performed by Cher. It's My Baby Shot Me Down, right? Written by Sonny Bono. And not only do you know that the lover is being shot, by using bang bang, you actually hear that they're being shot. Bang bang, he shot me down. Bang bang, I hit the ground. Bang bang, that awful sound. It's almost as if you're hearing the shots as they go off, right? And what about over the cobbles he clattered and clashed? In the darkened yard, he tapped with his whip on the shutters, but all was locked and barred. And that's by Alfred Noyes. I think that's the Highwayman, maybe. So clattered and clashed, tapped. Those are words that the sound of them clattered, clash. When we say a clash of, thunder and lightning, that almost sounds like the thunder. Or a clash of cymbals. If you were to bang cymbals together, clash them, then that's sort of that clash is how the cymbals sound. And I hope that you found this helpful, and I will see you next time. Here's the list of works cited and consulted.